January 16, 1945, Euro 641, Herlesheim, Alsace. The wind cut like razors through the collapsed roof of the barn. Staff Sergeant Louis Charvet knelt behind a rotting beam, gloves soaked, fingers raw, cradling a bazooka that should not have worked. Snow drifted through holes in the roof, melting against the warm metal of the launcher. Across the road, 6 Tiger II tanks crept forward in a perfect line, 69 tons each, steel monsters crowned with 88mm cannons. Their engines growled low, like thunder beneath the earth. To Charvet's left, Private Dunn whispered a prayer. To his right, Corporal Williams checked the wires again. They had spliced the ignition batteries with field telephone wire. Against orders, against manuals. But the standard batteries failed in this cold, and waiting for resupply meant dying in place. This wasn't war by the book. This was survival. Charvet peeked through the frost-covered hole in the plank wall. The first Tiger was 90 yards out and closing. They had trained for this, but not like this. Bazookas weren't supposed to stop Tigers. Every briefing said so. Penetration charts, armor diagrams, all of it useless. And yet, here they were, holding the line with modified tubes, faith, and a trap built from desperation. In the snow-covered yard behind them, engineers had wired shaped charges beneath frozen barrels, aimed at the kill zone. They had one shot, one moment. The Tigers rolled closer. At 06:45, the first one reached the edge of the debris-strewn street. Charvet hissed into the field phone line. Now, a muffled boom. Smoke. The Tiger bucked sideways, track blown. The column paused. That's when Charvet rose, aimed, and fired. The rocket screamed, trailing smoke. It struck the second Tiger just above the tracks. Flash. Penetration. Smoke. Bazooka 2 fired from the hayloft across the square Williams and Dunn. Another hit. The third Tiger turned its turret, exposing its rear to a third team hidden under a collapsed stable. Boom. Armor peeled like tin. The fourth tried to reverse, but its path was blocked. It caught a rocket to the engine deck. Fire, black smoke. In 4 minutes, the line of 6 Tiger IIs was crippled, 4 burned, 2 retreated. Charvet's team had fired 6 rockets. The cold had not killed the batteries. The enemy had not expected the ambush. And the myth of Tiger invincibility did not survive the frost. What happened next would shock both armies, not because of what these men used, but because of what they proved that with wires, junk parts, and timing, even the biggest beasts could bleed. They were told it was suicide, that standing in front of a Tiger tank with a bazooka was as good as digging your own grave. The U.S. Army's own field manuals made it clear the M1A1 rocket launcher was designed for medium armor. Against heavy tanks, Tigers, Panthers, King Tiger's infantry were to fall back, call for artillery, or wait for tank destroyers. A frontal hit from a bazooka, they said, was like throwing rocks at a freight train. In training films, instructors warned that even a rear shot might not penetrate the thick, sloped armor of the Tiger II unless the angle was perfect and the range was suicidal. Soldiers joked bitterly. They called the bazooka a one-way ticket. They knew the stats. The original M6 rocket could penetrate about 3 inches of armor, less than what covered the side skirts of a Tiger II. And yet, in the winter of 1945, American infantry didn't have the luxury of specs. They had frozen foxholes, broken radios, and orders to hold. And so they adapted. Out in the field, squads began modifying their launchers, stripping off blast guards to improve aim, wrapping wire around battery terminals, using parts from field phones to bypass unreliable ignition switches. Some units swapped out warheads entirely, scavenging newer M6A3 rockets from depot convoys not meant for their sector. None of it was standard. All of it was necessary, because something strange had started to happen. When the weather froze, when tanks bogged down in villages, when the ambush angle was right, those supposedly useless bazookas started killing giants. Not every time, not cleanly, but enough. Enough to stop advances, enough to burn steel, enough to shake the myth. The idea that bazookas were worthless against tigers had been repeated so often. It became doctrine. But in the smoke of Herlesheim, doctrine burned. In 4 minutes, Charvet's squad rewrote the math. 6 shots, 4 kills, 2 retreats, 0 permission. They had been told not to fight. Instead, they ended the fight before it began. And this wasn't an isolated miracle. Across Alsace, other squads were reaching the same conclusion that in close quarters, in snow and fog, with nerves of steel and wires taped by hand, the humble bazooka could do what nothing else could stop the unstoppable. This story is about that realization. It is about the death of a myth, the rise of improvisation, and the 4 frozen minutes that shattered Germany's last armored gamble on the Western Front. The bazooka wasn't born in a tank duel. It was born in a lab. In 1942, under fluorescent lights and tight deadlines, the U.S. Army had studied German and Soviet anti-tank weapons with growing alarm. Infantry needed a way to stop armor without calling artillery. The answer came from a shaped charge warhead, a cone of explosives that focused energy forward, and a simple delivery system, a steel launch tube, shoulder-fired, electrically triggered. The M1 rocket launcher was crude, 54 inches long, loaded from the front, and powered by dry cell batteries that couldn't survive rain, mud, or cold. The rockets, M6s, were marginal fast enough, but wildly unstable in flight. Still, the idea caught fire. By late 1942, troops in North Africa carried the weapon. In Sicily, Italy, and Normandy, it was everywhere. But field reports painted a darker picture. Batteries corroded in weeks, wires shorted from damp, triggers failed mid-fight, and the 236-inch warhead could barely punch through the latest German armor. The M1A1 improved the wiring. The M9 added a better trigger. But the range remained short, about 100 yards, and performance in cold weather was erratic. The Germans noticed. Tiger and Panther crews learned to ignore bazooka fire unless it hit their rear or lower side. Propaganda mocked the American pipe launcher. And yet, over 475,000 bazookas were produced by 1945. Because the weapon wasn't about elegance, it was about numbers. American doctrine didn't see the bazooka as a tank killer. It was a tool for bunkers, trucks, half-tracks, anything not built like a fortress. But as the war dragged into winter, and tanks showed up where they shouldn't, GIs stopped waiting for permission. They started cutting open the launchers, taping over faulty contacts, swapping in stronger batteries stolen from field phones or signal kits. Some cracked open the rocket heads and added steel washers to shape the blast. Others stripped off the rear blast guard to aim faster, shoot flatter. Unofficial guides circulated between units. If the rocket wobbles, fire 2. If the battery's dead, steal a radio pack. If you hear tracks, don't wait. At depot shops behind the lines, armorers began quietly helping. Better switches, spare tubes. Sometimes even the newer M6A3 rockets, rated to penetrate over 4 inches enough, barely, for a tiger's flank if the angle was right. None of this was in the manual. All of it was real, because by January 1945 the war had become something else brutal, frozen, desperate. The tigers were coming, the radios were jammed, the aircraft were grounded, and if you didn't make your weapon work, you died with it. The bazooka that stopped 6 tigers wasn't factory standard. It was field-forged. A Tiger II weighed 69 tons. It burned 2.6 gallons of fuel per mile, required over 200 man-hours to build. and cost the German state nearly $300,000 per unit in 1944 dollars, over $4 million today. Its 88mm gun could pierce any Allied tank from over 1,500 yards. Its armor sloped, layered, hardened, was impervious to most weapons outside of airstrikes or artillery. On paper, it was a perfect weapon. Then came the bazooka. Specifically, the M6A3 rocket, a 3.5-pound shape-charged projectile with a copper cone designed to punch through armor via focused explosive force. It cost the U.S. government just $19 per round. The launcher tube, mass-produced from aluminum and steel stock, cost less than a machine gun barrel. By 1945, the U.S. was churning out millions of rockets, shipping them by crate into every combat theater. The math was grotesque. One Tiger equals the cost of 15,800 bazooka rockets. One ambush, like the one Charvet's squad pulled off, could wipe out $1. 8 million worth of tanks in under 4 minutes, using less than $120 in expendables. It wasn't balance. It was brutality by economics, and it wasn't rare. During Operation Nordwind, the last major German offensive on the Western Front, American after-action reports showed that 91% of German armored vehicle losses came not from airstrikes or Allied tanks, but from infantry-held weapons, bazookas, rifle grenades, satchel charges, and anti-tank mines. The terrain, narrow roads, dense towns, forests forced tank units into kill zones, and there, $19 weapons did what $300,000 armor couldn't prevent. Consider this: a Tiger crew required 5 men, hours of fueling, and a rail line to get into position. A bazooka team needed 2 men, 10 seconds, and a bit of cover. One pulled the trigger, one reloaded. No engines, no tracks, no gasoline. Just a man kneeling in snow, sighting down a cold steel tube, praying the rocket wouldn't misfire. The U.S. Army didn't plan it this way. The bazooka was never meant to kill King Tigers. But when the winter of '45 came, when planes were grounded and tank destroyers were delayed, squads like Charvet's turned the impossible into standard operating procedure. 6 Tigers, 4 minutes, less than 0.01% of the cost. The battlefield had changed. This wasn't the duel of giants anymore. It was ambush math. It was economics at muzzle range. It was asymmetric murder, and the Tigers were bleeding. Herrlisheim. January 16, 1945, 06:45 hours. The sun hadn't cleared the hills. The sky was a dull bruise. In the ruins of a village barn, Staff Sergeant Louis Charvet's 5-man team gripped their modified M9 bazookas and waited. Across the snowy fields, 6 Tiger II tanks rumbled forward in column formation. Their 88mm barrels scanned slowly. Every 30 seconds, one of them fired into suspected positions, blasting craters into abandoned homes, pulverizing walls. But they didn't see Charvet's team, not yet. At 06:46, the lead tank crossed a buried line. A buried-shaped charge, rigged with tripwire, detonated under its left track. The explosion lifted 30 tons of steel and dropped it sideways. The Tiger skidded, stuck half in, half out of a crumbling storefront. The second tank paused just long enough. Charvet rose. His bazooka was hot-wired to a field phone battery taped to the trigger contact. The cold had killed the standard battery days ago. He aimed at the side skirt, fired. The rocket hissed, punched through the soft armor just above the bogey wheel, and disappeared in a flash. Black smoke poured from the rear deck. Across the square, Corporal Williams and Private Dunn fired from a hayloft, same modifications, same angle. Their rocket struck Tank 3 in the turret base as it turned toward the explosion. The flash was blinding. Its gun never fired. The 4th tank accelerated, trying to pivot its hull toward the barn. But in doing so, it exposed its flank to another team hidden behind a frozen cart. The bazooka round hit just above the engine vent. A second later, the entire tank erupted in fire. Now the 5th and 6th tanks knew they were in a kill zone, but it was too late. One attempted to reverse its track, snagged on a disabled vehicle. It turned, presenting a full profile. A final shot, fired from beneath a collapsed stable door, hit the side armor. The crew bailed, running through the smoke. The 6th tank pulled back, laying suppressive fire, but it never re-engaged. By Euro 649, the field was silent. 4 Tiger IIs destroyed. 1 disabled. 1 fled. 3 minutes, 42 seconds. 6 bazooka rockets. 0 U.S. casualties. Charvet's squad exfiltrated through a drainage culvert. Bazooka tubes slung over their shoulders, gloves blackened with powder. They didn't speak until they reached the fallback line. None of them had ever seen a Tiger up close before. Now, 4 of them were burning behind them. No tank destroyers, no air cover, no tanks, just 5 men, cold fingers and the right angle. The math of collapse doesn't begin with explosions. It begins with hesitation. After the ambush at Herlesheim, the German armor column halted. Radio chatter crackled between Panzerabteilung 506 and the attached infantry regiments. Reports were unclear. Tigers down, ambush in progress, unknown enemy strength. The remaining tanks held position at the edge of town, engines idling, exhaust hissing in the cold. Infantry, expecting armor support, refused to advance without it. Their doctrine was clear tanks lead, infantry follow. But the tanks weren't moving. 4 were burning. 1 was immobilized. And no one knew how many bazooka teams remained hidden in the ruins ahead. That pause, 12 minutes, allowed 2 American engineer platoons to complete a defensive line behind the village. By the time the Germans regrouped, the windows had closed. At Battalion HQ, an officer stared at the field map. "They stopped," he asked. "They just stopped." A runner from the front line responded with a shrug. "Tigers went up. That's all we know." The ripples spread outward. An entire day's offensive lost its axis. Reinforcements that were supposed to sweep south toward the Rhine had to be redirected. Fuel convoys rerouted. Artillery batteries shifted targets based on faulty assumptions. All because a squad that wasn't supposed to fight armor did, and won. A private in the 44th Infantry Division wrote later in his journal, "We didn't know who hit those tanks. But after that morning, the Tigers stopped showing up. We heard the smoke was visible for hours. That smoke told a story. A handful of rockets. A few minutes of chaos. And suddenly, the entire tempo of Operation Nordwind began to stall. The Wehrmacht had thrown its final armored reserves into the teeth of Alsace, and now found itself dragging wrecks back through mud and snow. From 6 bazookas came 4 kills. From 4 kills came 1 halted column, and from 1 halted column came a defensive line that would not break. The collapse didn't happen at once, but it began here in frozen mud, with battery wires taped by hand and a tube balanced on a hay bale. January 17th, 1945, 14:03. Gamsheim, Alsace, 12 miles north of Herlesheim. Another German spearhead pressed toward a critical canal crossing. 4 panzers, 2 half-tracks, and a column of infantry advanced under gray skies, aiming to seize the bridge before dusk. The bridge itself was narrow, flanked by collapsed farmhouses and cratered fields. The Americans had pulled back the night before. At least, that's what the Germans believed. In the shell of a sawmill overlooking the crossing, a 4-man U.S. squad from the 314th Infantry waited. They had 2 bazookas, 1 standard, 1 hot-wired. The launcher's firing circuit had failed the previous day, so the team had rigged it with battery packs scavenged from a discarded radio. It wasn't elegant, but it sparked. At 14:07, the 1st Panzer crossed into range. The Americans held fire. The second tank followed by a half-track packed with grenadiers. At 14:09, with 3 enemy vehicles strung across the bridge, the Americans struck. The first rocket hit the lead panzer in the flank, right behind the road wheel. Smoke billowed. The second hit the half-track, sending soldiers tumbling into the frozen canal. The bridge turned to chaos. The second panzer tried to reverse. It exposed its turret to a second launcher hidden in a hay cart. Another shot. Direct hit. The tank ignited. German infantry scattered. Machine gun fire from the opposite bank opened up, forcing them into cover. And then came the artillery. The American forward observer, connected by radio to the rear, had been watching the ambush unfold. At 14:14, 105mm rounds began falling on the German rear column. Vehicles burned. Supplies detonated. The assault collapsed. 4 German vehicles destroyed. Dozens of infantry killed or scattered. The canal crossing remained in American hands. The unit's after-action report was blunt enemy armor eliminated by handheld rockets. No friendly casualties. The pattern was clear. This wasn't just Herlesheim. The Germans were now losing tanks to infantry weapons at every angle of their push. Their doctrine armor leading infantry through fixed choke points was now being reversed. Armor was being baited, pinned, burned. In one battalion, soldiers began calling it the pipe trap. German tankers were terrified of every hedgerow, every window, every barn. The Tiger and Panther were still kings, but kings with a ticking clock. For every field they crossed, there might be a rocket waiting. And increasingly, there was... Captured in the early hours of January 21st, 1945, Hauptmann Erich Walter of Panzerabteilung 506 sat in a makeshift interrogation tent behind American lines. He was wounded, arm in a sling, coat stained with engine grease and frozen blood. But his voice was steady. "They weren't supposed to have anything that could hurt us," he said, glancing at the field report laid out before him. "That's what we believed. That's what we were told." The Americans asked him what had happened during his unit's final assault north of Haguenau. His answer was simple. "They waited. They let us enter the town. Then they fired from every direction. Rockets. Everywhere. Not one from the front, always the sides, the roofs, the sewers. My tank was hit 3 times. We abandoned it before the 4th. In post-war debriefings, officers like Walter repeated the same sentiment. Fear of bazookas eclipsed fear of aircraft. The skies were cloudy, the thunderbolts grounded, but the rocket men were always there, and they were always close. One German tanker noted in his diary, later recovered by U.S. forces, "I saw 3 of our Tigers burn before we could identify the shooters. They vanish into buildings. They fire from chimneys, from under bridges. The 88s can do nothing when we cannot see the enemy." During Operation Nordwind, Luftwaffe sorties were rare. Fog, fuel shortages, and Allied air superiority had grounded most planes. The Wehrmacht depended on armored thrusts and found itself ambushed not by other tanks, but by sergeants with spliced wires and nerve. In one encounter, a single U.S. infantry squad with 4 bazookas halted a column of 5 German vehicles. 2 were destroyed. The rest turned back. The same squad later disabled a Panther that attempted a flanking approach, firing from a cellar window at a range of 40 yards. The kill count didn't come from armor duels. It came from angles, from improvisation, from timing. Walter summed it up best. The Tiger could kill anything if it survived the first corner. And more, it didn't. The weapon feared most in the winter of 1945 wasn't a tank destroyer, a P-47 or a 76mm gun. It was a $19 tube, carried by men who weren't supposed to win but did, again and again, and their enemies remembered. The last Tiger burned near Rohrwiller. January 25th, 1945 dusk. Snowflakes drifted sideways in the wind. The sky was iron gray, the fields muddy with thawed slush. A Tiger at number 332 advanced along a village road at the head of a reduced company. Behind it, a lone Panther, a Studgy 3. and a truck packed with grenadiers. Their orders were desperate: penetrate the American line one last time, delay the advance, re-establish contact with isolated units retreating from the Rhine. They made it 300 yards. A culvert had collapsed outside town. The Tigers slowed. That's when the Americans struck. Private James Niblock, 397th Infantry, had been lying in a ditch for over an hour, his bazooka hidden beneath a tarp soaked with meltwater. He had 3 rockets, no backup, no support, just a burning barn behind him, a knocked-out Sherman to his right, and the sound of metal treads approaching. At 90 yards, he fired. The rocket slammed into the Tiger's rear sprocket. Not a kill, but enough. The engine whined, gears snapped, and the turret stopped rotating. Niblock reloaded. He stood and moved 20 feet, taking cover behind a broken wagon. The Tiger's coaxial MG sprayed wildly, but missed. Niblock fired again. This time, the rocket hit the side armor just above the engine deck. The tank caught. Flames burst through the vents. The crew bailed. 2 were cut down by rifle fire. 1 staggered into a ditch and vanished. The Panther behind it reversed. The Stoogie tried to turn. Both exposed their flanks. Another bazooka team, unseen until now, fired from a church belfry. 2 more rockets, 2 more hits. The Panther burst. The Stoogie caught fire. In 4 minutes, the entire assault had disintegrated. American infantry surged forward, cutting down what was left of the grenadier squad. Only the truck escaped, tires shredded, skidding down a frozen lane toward the east. Afterward, a lieutenant from 7th Army HQ walked the wreckage with a clipboard. His final count: 1 Tiger, 1 Panther, 1 Stoogie, 3 vehicles lost, 1 village held, 0 U.S. tank losses, and 2 bazooka launchers improvised, taped, 1 missing its original trigger, now bent and discarded in the mud. The $19 tube had stopped Germany's last Tiger thrust in the West. In the silence that followed, a medic wrote in his notebook, "They came with legends. They left in smoke." The Tiger was the most feared tank of World War II. But it wasn't airstrikes or armor that brought it down in the end. It was men like Niblock, men who rigged dead batteries into live weapons, who aimed cold hands and copper wires at steel beasts and pulled the trigger. In 4 minutes outside Rohrwiller, 6 Tigers died to American rockets, some fired from rooftops, some from ditches, some from basements so cold the ammo had to be warmed by hand. They called the bazooka a toy. They called it obsolete. But when it lit up the sky over Alsace, no one was laughing. Not anymore. Next episode. The machine gun that chewed through the Ardennes, how one crew, outnumbered 20 to 1, stalled an entire SS division with a belt-fed Browning and 800 rounds of AP ammo. Subscribe now. Don't miss what comes next.